Hi, I'm Karen Rice and welcome to my YouTube channel. This is the premiere, so you can watch this tutorial live with me and ask me any questions or put any comments, and I look forward to hearing from you. So, shall we get started? So just to say, this is a step-by-step watercolour painting tutorial using just one colour of a cosmos field. For a full list of all the materials I'm using, please see the description below. Just to say, I'm actually masking out all of the cosmos flowers and a little bit of light in the water. I'm going to let that dry naturally. Once the masking fluid is dry, wet your sky area with some water. Make sure the water is clean, especially if you've done a little bit of colour mixing. I've mixed up a sort of milky wash of black, and I'm applying this now with the size 6 brush and painting wet in wet, leaving gaps for the clouds. And the clouds get smaller as they go towards the horizon, and the sky colour, in this case black, gets a little bit paler. What I'm doing now is I'm scrunching up some of the kitchen towel, or you can use tissue, and I'm lifting off some of the paint to create some more fluffy clouds, and it creates some hard edges as well. So you can do that. Sometimes I get a bit carried away with this, so see how you go. If your sky goes wrong, all you have to do is wet the paper again, wash it off and start again. What I'm doing now is, while that sky is drying, I've wet all the field area and I'm working wet into wet. Remember, I'm just using black, so it's all really nice and simple. I've left a little gaps here, a bit like how I've done with the clouds, to create some lighter areas. Because it's wet on wet, that will bleed in a little bit, and put a little slightly milkier colour now for the grasses at the top of this field, using my size 2 brush, just tapping away with slightly creamier paint to create that tonal value. Now I'm working damp into wet, so the surface is still wet, but my paint is creamier, and it creates more tonal value, and the paint doesn't move as much, so you get these fuzzy edges. And what I'm doing now, the paint is even creamier and the surface of the paper isn't as wet, so you get even darker tones as well. So I'm just basically making smaller marks in the distance and bigger marks as you come closer, and it creates depth because it makes those smaller marks look further away. And I'm just now again using very creamy paint. Don't be scared to do this, because it always dries lighter as well. Now here's my big marks using my size 14 brush in the foreground here, creating these marks for grasses and stems, etc. So the surface is damp and my brush is damp, so it's creamy. And so I've got lots of tonal value here. I've got the light, the medium and the dark tones, and you get this using the damp into damp, wet into wet technique. I'm using the size 2 brush now to create some grasses, using thin creamy paint, damp into damp. Working a little bit on the background hills here. Now make sure when you do this that your sky is dry, or it's nearly touched, it's touch dry, so that that paint doesn't bleed. As you can see, I've got a nice hard edge there, so it's safe. I haven't actually blow dried my painting yet, because I'm waiting for the foreground to dry off a little bit so I can scratch out some grasses with my plastic card. Here what I'm doing with my size 6 brushes, I'm just putting some darker tones at the peak of those mountains, but also a little bit more in the foreground just behind that cosmos flower, and I'm working damp into wet. So you've got that. So I just want to have those peaks looking a bit darker at the top. It's quite a nice effective technique, and I'm just softening the edge there with my damp brush. So here I am scraping off those grasses. So you don't want the paint too wet, because it all just goes back on itself. You want it damp and almost sort of the shines going before you lift off. And now I'm sprinkling just ordinary table salt onto the damp surface, and I'm going to let that dry naturally, so don't blow dry, because you want that magical effect of the salt to work. And here we are, the salt has worked. Hurrah, I say to myself. I'm always pleased when my salt's worked. So everything is dry now, and I'm just painting now that next little bit of mountain, so leaving the background ones dry alone, and I'm just painting this next sort of layer wet on dry. So with wet on dry, you get nice, crisp, hard edges. And as you can see, it pulls away from those distant mountains. I've made a slightly darker colour for this particular mountain right in the middle. I just want to really, if you look at the reference photograph, I want to make it nice and dark at the top. Remember, this is wet on dry. I'm using my size 6 brush, and I'm very, very carefully just sort of really finessing this edge. I've just added some more paint to my brush. Don't have your brush too dry. Really heavily load it, because sometimes the paint dries quickly onto the paper and it will leave you with a hard edge, and you don't want that. So make sure you really load your brush. And what I've done there is I've rinsed my brush, and with the water on the brush, I wipe the excess on the side. I'm pushing that sort of wettish brush upwards towards that dark area. Don't pull the paint down, push it up, because you get that light area below it. And the painting has dried now. I've given it a good blow dry, and I'm painting that next layer of mountains, the one in the foreground. And what this does, if you look at those other 2 layers now that I've previously painted, I'm really creating depth, not just with tonal value, but also using the edge, the hard edge that watercolour painting has when you paint wet on dry. So it's a really good, useful technique. I'm using the same technique as I did previously. I've painted that dark on, wet my brush, and I'm pushing a little bit of water up towards that dark, so you get that sort of misty effect just below it. It's a really good way of painting mist and soft areas as well. And now I'm just diluting now, coming down to the sort of middle ground. So I'm going to let that bit dry off a little bit there, and I'm working on the left hand side now with my size 6 brush. Now the consistency of the paint's slightly creamier now because I'm building up tonal values. It's quite dark, this area in the photograph, and the reason why I want to exaggerate that darkness is because it's light against dark with that light on the water. So it's all these compositional things I'm doing here to really get your painting to look good and create depth, and the light's so important. So I'm still using this size 6 brush. Now this side is still damp. As you can see, the paint's fuzzy and it's drifting up. Don't worry about that. The paint here is very creamy because I want to create sort of like the tops of trees sort of running up. So I'm using the technique of damp into damp to do that. So, you know, just take your time in these areas. And if your painting dries a little bit, just use a little spritzer bottle and just give it a little spritz just to soften everything and wet everything. But don't create big puddles, just a little misty spray. And I'm just finessing now the edges here, just to, again, looking at the reference photograph to inspire me. And I'm just painting this central part of darks here. Now, it's important to get these darks in because this is going to make your cosmos flowers really stand out because they're light. So this is dark against light, really important. Now, look at this. The painting has dried and look how much lighter it's dried. It's amazing. That's why you've got to go for it sometimes. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking off my masking fluid. Now that's why it's so important for your painting to be dry, not even damp. You must blow dry or leave it for a couple of hours, because if you try to attempt to take off masking fluid, you could tear your paper or smudge your painting. So that's a really important tip. What I'm doing now, masking fluid remove, I'm also taking off the salt with my kitchen towel. Everything's off now. Everything's been taken off. Now I can paint these beautiful cosmos flowers. Take your time with this. It's wet on dry, and I'm using the size 6 brush, and I'm painting the back of the flower and the sort of the detail going into the flower, and I will be painting the stem as well. And I'm using, well, you know, sort of quite a creamy sort of wash. It's quite dark. If you compare it, it's probably as dark as that right hand mountain was when I painted it previously. Remember to really take your time, load your brush, use that tip to get the detail, and remember to breathe, because I sometimes I forget to breathe, and I realise that because especially when it's something very detailed. So take your time with the stem, just sort of rub it down a little bit. Don't try and do it all in one go, because sometimes it can just go, you can go off piste, as it were. So really take your time. I'm sort of just edging my way down. It is quite dark. It really comes away from the foreground. So just, you know, try and be as brave as you can. I've watered down the colour, so it's a very softer tone on some of these petals here. And what I really liked about this photograph is the kind of way you can paint the cosmos. It's a really nice, easy way. It's wet on dry, and then you do a little bit of softening of edges here and there, but it's not too fussy. I really like it, and I love the way it just pops away from the background. It's so effective. So you can work your way around these petals, painting wet on dry, and then rinsing your brush, taking the excess liquid off on the side, and then softening as you go. So those of you that would like templates for the drawing of this painting and for longer videos with lots more voiceovers, lots more tips and techniques, why not think about joining my Patreon channel membership? And a little tag at the top there will give you some more information. And if you've got any questions, why not ask in the live chat now or later and have a think about it. Right, back to the painting. So I've blow dried the painting and I'm putting on the next sort of layer of tones and details. I call this stage of the painting darks and details because it reminds me not to overpaint, not to overdo it, not to get things muddy. Now, if you find it tricky painting stems, I would suggest maybe turning your painting upside down. It's the same when you're painting sort of branches in trees as well. You may find it easier, just that access, the way, your hand might feel freer. So I'm just painting this upside down, and it helps me anyway. So I'm just giving final little dark accents to the back of these flowers using creamier paint, and I'm using my size 2 brush. I don't know about you, but I really enjoy just using one colour because it just takes away all the pressure of colour mixing. You can just get on with the painting. The background is dry. I'm painting wet on dry. I'm using the size 6 brush. I'm just putting some smaller marks in just here and there, and I'm putting a little bit more dark on that water's edge because, as I said earlier, when it dried a lot paler. So when it does that, you can just go over another layer. So it's another layer of watercolour painting, and I'm just softening and I'm just working my way around that flower as well, just to bring that flower out as well. And the paint I'm putting right on that water's edge is creamier, so it really pops that out, and it really sort of makes that water look really light as well. And I'm just cutting into the flower here, so you can really take your time with these details. Don't feel rushed, just enjoy it. Enjoy the process rather than thinking about the finishing line. I think that's partly, when I was painting for years, that's one thing I found, was that worrying about the end and forgetting about that middle bit, which is the most important bit. Be present in your painting. So I'm just working now again on this middle bit here, because this is a really important bit, because this brings out those light flowers. So I'm still using the size 6 brush, and it's sort of a medium to dark tone of paint. I'm just tidying up here because it looked a bit complicated what I was doing with the flowers there. So just sort of finessing that a little bit and working wet on dry with this size 6 brush going towards the right hand side. So really bringing out that water's edge, but also working on creating some more trees and things like that on that far side of the shore. Now this is something you can do. You don't have to, but I thought if some of you have had a few little hiccups with the your little cosmos flowers, which I did have one in this one in the middle here. I kept quiet about it, if you notice. I'm just sort of tidying it up with some white gouache. You can use white watercolour paint, but it's a little bit more transparent, so you might need to use a couple of layers. I'm just tidying up this one on the right as well. No one's gonna know. It just all works well, and you're not cheating. It's still a water-based medium. Now, you know I love to spatter, so I'm spattering this white. You don't have to do it, but it's my process, and I just think they look like little tiny little cosmos flowers or other white wild flowers. And I thought I'd spatter some of the black. Again, you don't have to do this, and I'm using my hand now because I've just realized I might spatter over my white flowers. So do think about that. You don't have to do it, but at least you've seen me do it, so you can decide. Here is the finished painting. I've taken away the framing tape, so you can see this nice white border. It gives me time to assess to see if I need to do any more. I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and if you are watching this live with me, thank you so much for being part of that. If you would like to see more videos like this, why not subscribe to my YouTube channel and you will get updates of my latest video. And don't forget to set the little bell as a reminder of my latest upload. And again, if you'd like to join the Patreon membership, details about that will be in the description below. Thank you again for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.